Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Jerusalem Press Club webinar, a special webinar for the 54th Jerusalem Day in cooperation with Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research. The events in the capital over the past few days have only reiterated the importance of hearing about the statistical findings in one of the most contested cities of the world. Before we dive into the fascinating conclusions of the JIPR's 2020 Facts and Trends study, from its primary author, we will hear from the Institute's Director General, who will speak a bit about the report itself, who it's shared with on the decision-making level, and its intended impact. But beforehand, a few questions on the current situation in Jerusalem, as most of us are tuning in remotely from outside of the city. Yail has led the Institute for the past 5 years, following a career in political counseling and planning positions for government projects in Israel and abroad. Yail, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Could you begin by telling us what you know about the situation from your end, and with your knowledge of the various players, perhaps what your recommendations would be for cooling down the situation?
Okay, so right now, as far as I know, and of course, things in Jerusalem are very volatile, so it could be changed in any second. But right now, the situation is relatively calm in and around the old city and the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. We do know that 2 days ago, on Friday, there were quite riots inside the Temple Mount and also outside of the Nablus Gate and in Sheikh Jarrah, in which more than 200 Palestinians and 17 policemen were injured. Most of them, by the way, not in a severe way. These and also yesterday, of course, during the Laylat el-Qadr prayer, there were some conflicts between the security forces and some of the people, again, in the same 3 areas: the Damascus Gate, the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Sheikh Jarrah. These events are a continuation of events that started around the Damascus Gate already 3 weeks ago, in the beginning of the Ramadan month. They started, as mentioned, in Damascus Gate, then they moved to Sheikh Jarrah, and now it seems that they went also inside the Temple Mount. In general, we see a few reasons for what's happening now. Why is it happening now? The first thing is the end of the COVID-19 curfew here in Jerusalem, and the relatively positive feeling of freedom that is going around to people, to youngsters that were literally locked in their homes for almost a year. Some of them denied the ability to go to work or to schools, depends on their age. Some of them were basically unable to find any way to be active for the last year, and then all of a sudden this thing was lifted almost completely. And I know those of you that are here in Israel, they understand the huge shift that happened here in the last 2 months from a total curfew into almost normality. The second reason is the Ramadan itself, meaning the Ramadan is a month, and I'm sure that everyone here that are serving in the Middle East know very well let's say the traits of the Ramadan month, including the fact that night become day and day become night, and people are extremely active in the night, especially youngsters are extremely active at night. And again, I remind you, many of those people lost their work during the COVID crisis. They still didn't find places of work. East Jerusalem is characterized, and I'm sure Yair will talk about later, with a lot of people that are working in the tourism industry, which of course did not recover yet from the COVID crisis. Others are working in other temporary job places that they cannot cover their basic needs. So definitely the situation of a political crisis, an economic crisis, the feeling of a sudden freedom after a year of curfew, and the Ramadan months, all of them put together created some kind of a perfect storm that is in the base of what happened here in the last 3 weeks. To that, we can add the decision of the Israeli police to block the plaza, the square outside of Damascus Gate, which is perceived as, let's call it the town square in East Jerusalem. And this move, although done for public order things and not necessarily in order to spite the people of East Jerusalem, was perceived as some kind of spiting, some kind of an activity that was done to harm them. And that led, of course, to the series of events that I described before.
Okay, and as to your recommendations of maybe how to bring the fire down a bit, you've been in contact with different members of Jerusalem's community for years. You must know a little bit about their what makes them tick.
Okay, so first of all, I think the easiest tip is the one what should have not been done in the first place. And there is an expression in Hebrew, I'm not sure we can translate it to Hebrew, but it says that a wise man know how to get out from a situation that a smart man will never go into. And I think that's actually what we can say about what happened in Damascus Gate. I think that a bit more of sensitivity and trying to understand let's call it the subtleties of life in East Jerusalem in the Ramadan would lead every police chief to understand that what happened in Damascus Gate was not smart. This was done, so basically this cannot be healed right now. And actually, some people might say that the fact that the police decided to remove those barricades was also adding to the flames, because it gave some kind of achievement to the people that were leading the riots, and that actually was not a smart move out of the police. But of course, I'll leave it to every political commentator to choose what would be the right thing to say about that. At this point, first and foremost, I would advise to be careful of anything that might lead to clashes within the Temple Mount Al-Aqsa Mosque area. That's the most volatile and most sensitive area in Jerusalem, but in general in the Middle East. And we saw that clashes that started there in the 90s and then again in the beginning of the 21st century led to some of the worst clashes in between Israel and the Palestinians ever, including the Second Intifada. So right now it seems that the police is doing, I don't know if to say a good job, but a relatively good job in preventing riots there, or in trying to minimize riots there. But that should be the #1 priority. No matter what's happening in Damascus Gate or in Sheikh Jarrah, to keep Al-Aqsa to keep the flames in Al-Aqsa as low as possible. I should remind you that tomorrow, during the Jerusalem Day, there is a parade. It's called the Flag Parade of Jews that are coming from all over Israel to the old city, and for years this was known as a source of conflict between Jews and Arabs within the old city. One of the routes of this parade is going through the Damascus Gate, and I'm not sure that today would be, or tomorrow would be, the perfect day to lead tens of thousands of Israelis with Israeli flags through the Damascus Gate. It might be that it would be smarter to lead them through the Jaffa Gate or the Zion Gate, gates that are closer to the Jewish quarter and not in the midst of the old city. I would also advise as much conversation as possible between the police and the municipality, and in that I should mark our mayor that is doing his utmost in order to prevent these events, to discuss what can be done in order to lower the flame. And the third thing would be positive activities. I mentioned that some of the reasons for what we see is pure boredom. So positive activities within the different neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and in the area of the Damascus Gate could, of course, combine with all the rest. Yes, it could not stand by itself, but could lead to settling a bit of the events. By the way, it did happen, meaning 2 weeks ago, there was an effort to lower the flames in Damascus Gate, and for a while, it seems like it was working. We had few days that were relatively quiet, and then the Sheikh Jarrah issue came to the headlines, and the whole area was inflamed again. Of course, there is a Hamas motivation in Gaza to increase the tension here. So definitely we cannot ignore also from the area. Jerusalem does not stand by itself, although we Jerusalem might sometimes think we're the center of the world.
That is true as a former Jerusalemite. I'll also add that there's the issue of the Palestinian elections as well, but we're not going to get too much into that because we do have to spend most of our time on the report itself. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the report is aimed at doing, who it's submitted to, and what you wish your impact to be for it?
Absolutely. So every year since 1982, we in the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research submit a report. It's called the Jerusalem Statistical Yearbook on the situation of Jerusalem from all kinds of aspects, meaning from demography to climate, economy, tourism, housing, etc., etc. This report is edited by Dr. Maya Choshen and Yail Asaf Shapira, who is here with us today. We submitted this report to President Ruvi Rivlin. That was actually the last time that we're submitting it to President Rivlin, as he would leave his office in July. We also submitted it to the Mayor of Jerusalem, Moshe Leon, and to the Minister of Jerusalem, Rafi Peretz. And I think that if you want to understand Jerusalem better, and you want to understand some of the issues that we just discussed, understanding the basic information, the data on what's happening in the city of Jerusalem could be a great start for such an understanding.
Great. Well, we wish you luck with that. And now we'll turn the microphone over to Yail Asaf Shapira, Head of Data and Analysis and Services at the Institute. Yail, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. What I want to do is touch briefly on a few subjects. The first of them being demography. I think there is demography moves slowly, but there are a few things that may surprise you. And then employment, as you said, Yael, and then maybe something which connects employment with the COVID-19. And in the end, if we have time, I want to touch on construction. So I'll just begin. I'll share my screen just a few times to show things. Here it is. Okay, so Jerusalem is by far the largest city in Israel. It's approaching 1 million residents. This figure that you see here, the 936,000, is from the end of 2019. Now, most of the data is from Facts and Trends, as you said, Leo, and from the Statistical Yearbook of Jerusalem, which is published tomorrow on the internet, on the Institute's website, which has all the data, which is actually, again, as you said, Leo, is the basis of most of the researches that we do. So as you see, just a second, this is aimed at me. Okay, I'll do that. Better? Okay, so as you see, Jerusalem is 2 times the size of the second largest city in Israel, being Tel Aviv, and 3 times the size of Haifa. I think that the size of Jerusalem is one of its main features. Jerusalem is large. All the groups within it are very large, both the Arab and the Jews. Within the Jews, you have the seculars versus religious versus ultra-Orthodox. All these groups are the size of major cities in Israel, meaning if you would take, for example, the Arab population of Jerusalem and make it a city of its own, it would be one of the largest cities in Israel on its own. And same would go for the Jewish population, as you saw before. So this is one thing that should be understood about Jerusalem. Now, what does that hold for the city? What does that mean for the city? It means that when you look at the averages, they usually do not represent the groups themselves. You have large groups, very different from one another, and then the average does not represent any of the groups. What is the demographic balance between these groups? I'm going to show that again. Well, maybe I'll just leave the screen shared if it's okay. Okay, Jews versus Arabs. You have 38% of Arab population in Jerusalem, 62% of Jewish population. You see that this percentage is changing over the years, but you can see also that since 2010, it didn't change dramatically. And what I'm saying is that the rate of change is in fact changing. Now, why is that? Why is that? The natural increase is births minus deaths. This is the natural increase of the population. The natural increase of the Arab population in Jerusalem is dropping since 2000. It's dropping at quite a rapid pace. The Jewish natural increase is actually rising. These two actually joined on approximately on 2014, and since then you see that the situation is more or less balanced. Now we expect this to further change. Why is that? Because you see that the fertility rate of women in Jerusalem is changing also quite rapidly in demographic terms. The Arab women in Jerusalem bear less and less children, while the Jewish women in Jerusalem bear more and more children. The others that you see here, Jews and others, the others are mostly religion unclassified, which most of them being the immigrants from former Soviet Union, which were not classified as Jews, but they're still part of the Jewish society for every part of the Jewish society. Now this is quite a dramatic process. It's something that we should look at closely. Now, I should say that the Arab population in Jerusalem is changing at the same direction, and also almost at the same rate as the Arab population in Israel. We see that in the Arab population in Israel, in Jerusalem, and also in the Arab population in many Arab countries. So this is dropping quite rapidly. 3.2 children per Arab woman in Jerusalem in 2019. Why is this growing? Why is the Jewish population's total fertility rate, TFR, growing? This has to do mostly with a rise in the percentage of religious and ultra-Orthodox population within the city. The ultra-Orthodox, which bear approximately 6 children per woman, their percentage in Jerusalem is rising. Also the religious population, and then the average of the Jewish population is rising. Now, a few years ago, 10 years ago, this the percentage I showed before, the Jews versus Arab in Jerusalem, the percentage I showed before was opening the news on Jerusalem Day. This demographic balance, was the main figure that people would look at. This figure led to the construction of neighborhoods. It was a very important figure. But now that we see this process of the TFR dropping, what we saw before, the natural increase joining, this figure is no more, it's becoming a non-issue. But what is an issue is the geographic spread of the population. Sorry for that. Okay. We have in the western part of the city, on the west side of the green line, we have approximately 350,000 Jewish population and a small population of Arabs. On the eastern side of this line, we have very large populations of both Jews and Arabs. Jews, most of them live in very large neighborhoods constructed as single projects, Ramot, Neve Yaakov, Pisgat Ze'ev, etc. Sort of neighborhood cities constructed in East Jerusalem. And the Arabs, most of them live within the classic neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and within the old city. As I said, I'll be brief, so I'm going to turn now to workforce participation. The workforce participation among the Arab population of Jerusalem is very different between men and women. The Arab men in the major work ages participate at a rate of 78%. 78% of the Arabs at this age group join the workforce. Now, these data are pre-COVID. I'm going to show what happened during the COVID. This percentage is similar to the percentage in Israel as a whole. When we look at the women in Jerusalem, Arab women in Jerusalem participated at a very low percentage. This extremely low. But then when you compare it to Arab women in Israel as a whole, you see that there's a very large difference. And this is something that we should look at. When I look at the Jewish side of we have a very large difference, a very strong difference between the general population, the religious, the non-ultra-Orthodox population. We have large percentages of both men and women joining the workforce, while in the ultra-Orthodox population, we see that men join the workforce at a very low percentage, again, lower than Israel, and women at quite high. As you said, Yail, we see that the Arab and Jewish populations are employed at very different economic branches. We see that the Jewish population is employed in education and health. This is, I'd say, this is driven by the ages of the population, also in local and public administration, while the Arab population, construction, accommodation, food services, and trade. You see this large bar here. Now, what happened during COVID? On March 2020, we saw a dramatic rise in registered unemployed people. Now, this rise was within all groups, but the highest rise was within Arab men, which came in Jerusalem to approximately 25,000 people registered as unemployed. It then dropped, but continued, and we still have today almost 20,000 people. And this, Yail, I think, touches on what you said. These are the people, some of these are the people that have nothing to do during Ramadan, and therefore they're well, okay, I think it's understood. We see that the other groups are unemployed at lower rates. When you do this as percentages, the picture is more complex, of course, but you see that all groups are approximately steady with unemployment. Even when we look at February 2021, we didn't see any major drop. When we look at those small drops, this is within general population of women. This is quite a small drop, especially compared to what we saw here, or of course on March. So we see approximately a steady trend. And this is what's happening, I think, today in terms of employment. And last thing I want to touch on is the construction. We've seen construction rise and drop in Jerusalem, but I think that what's interesting is to look at where it's constructed. We see most of the construction in West Jerusalem neighborhoods. A growing percentage from this construction is in urban renewal projects, and it's going to be it's going to grow even faster because we have a lot of projects which are in certain stages of planning and approval. We see a small percentage in Jewish neighborhoods on East Jerusalem, and we see this percentage, approximately a quarter of the units constructed during these years in the Arab neighborhoods. Approximately 1.9 thousand dwelling units. Now this looks very small. I think we should add to it a certain percentage of unreported construction because there is a lot of unreported construction. We should also add to it some of these 300 units which are unknown because in the Arab neighborhoods you see that a lot of the construction goes without a specific address, but still you see that this percentage is smaller than the percentage in the population. I think that this is it for the beginning, and I think that right now I can open that for questions.
Thank you, Yair. So I'll just remind everyone participating that they're welcome to send questions in via the chat box on Zoom. One question that's come in has to do with your statistics on workforce participation, where you mentioned that the participation of Arab women is very low in comparison to that in the rest of the country. Could you elaborate a little bit about the socioeconomic status of Arabs or Arab women in Jerusalem versus the rest of the country to kind of put that into perspective?
Yes, the socioeconomic status of the Palestinian population in Jerusalem is low. The figure from the Central Bureau of Statistics stands at cluster 1, that being the lowest cluster of population of localities in Israel. And it's comparable to the lower end or lowest end of Arab localities in Israel, being the Bedouin localities of the Negev. So this low socioeconomic status is one of the main explanations for this low participation in the workforce. But I think that when we try to look into it, I think that we're talking about quite traditional society, poor society. We have the largest poverty rates within the large cities, and I think that these explain. I think that one thing that we don't see, as I showed, is the number of children usually these things go together in demography. We see the number of children dropping and the participation rate rising. Here we don't see the participation rate rising.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that. A question on construction. You spoke about the figures over the last 2 years from 2018 to 2020. How do those figures look in comparison to perhaps the last few decades?
Last 2 decades, I'm sorry, I do not have the data for the last 2 decades, but I think when I look at the last decade, I see that these figures are more or less stable. We do see that we have a problem with the data. We have those unknown being a very large percentage of the data in previous years. So we can't say very accurate things about previous years, but when we try to catch years where we have good data, we see that it's more or less stable. The trend is more or less stable.
Okay, and a question on, this is an issue that comes up always in Jerusalem, but perhaps if you could put it into context over the last year because of the COVID crisis, in terms of emigration from the city. It's a city known to have the highest rate of emigration to other cities around the country. Did that trend continue over the last year?
Well, the negative migration rate is representative of most large cities in Israel and abroad. It's something that characterizes large cities. We have cities in the world which have a deficit of tens or hundreds of thousands of residents per year. So I wouldn't. I would. It's not that uncommon, but yes, we did see it continue during the COVID. There is a very large difference between Jews and Arabs in terms of migration. The Jewish population migrates in very large numbers. To all the Jewish populations migrate outside of the city. We see major destinations being Bet Shemesh, mainly Haredi population, and also Tel Aviv, Modi'in, which is mostly families, young families. So we see most of the populations migrating out and in, but the balance is negative. And the Arab population has fewer to none possible destinations to migrate to. Their legal status is dependent on their place of residence. So it's a very, very strong limitation on migration.
And with regards to the issue of legal status, we have a question whether you know how many of the Arab inhabitants of East Jerusalem are Israeli citizens or have perhaps applied to it, for it.
We do have trends of it. Yail, do you want to comment on this question?
The national security, according to Bituach Leumi, the social security, we know that around 30,000 out of the 358,000 residents of East Jerusalem actually hold Israeli citizenship. We cannot say how many of them are people that had Israeli citizenship when they were born, meaning they are Israeli Arabs from the north that immigrated to Jerusalem during the days, and how many of them actually acquired Israeli citizenship. They are East Jerusalemites that acquired the citizenship. The rate of requests for Israeli citizenship is around 1,000 every year. And we know that in the last few years, last couple of years, around 1,200 requests were approved every year. It's a incredible increase. I can actually show the data, but it's an incredible increase. I happen to have exactly this slide open on my computer. Here, you can see it here, so you can see the trend of the last few years compared to what happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The number here dropped just because the data of 2020 ends in October 2020, so we still don't have the full data until the end of 2020.
Okay, thank you. And we have, as we do every 5 years, municipal elections coming up next year, if I recall correctly. Do you have any data in terms of the rate of participation of the Arab population in Jerusalem, which in the past has tended to avoid participating in those elections?
The rate of participation of the Arab population of Jerusalem is very low, extremely low. It's really when we look at it, most of the participants in the Arab neighborhoods are settlers, Jewish settlers within these Arab neighborhoods. We did see an Arab Muhammad, sorry. An Arab candidate. So we did see a very local trend of higher participation in the previous elections, but it doesn't look like this is something which is going to continue. And it's also something that's been talked about for many years. What will happen in the municipal election if the Palestinian population decides to participate? I think that this is a question of identity. It involves a lot of questions about whether to participate or not. It involves very deep questions and not just like the spread of the ballot boxes or something like that.
All right. Okay. You mentioned before that the concentration of Jewish residents in East Jerusalem is usually in designated neighborhoods. But we have a question about French Hill specifically, in which a reporter is writing, French Hill seems to be becoming more diverse with young educated Arab families moving in. Do you see this as a trend?
Definitely. We see French Hill, and to a lesser degree, we see this also in other neighborhoods which are adjacent to Arab neighborhoods. For example, Pisgat Ze'ev, of families, and I think that in French Hill it began with students, people that were studying in the Hebrew University and moved in to French Hill, and I think that definitely you see this as a diverse neighborhood. Possibly the only one in Jerusalem.
Very interesting. I think we have time perhaps for one or two more questions before we wrap up. We have a question less connected to the study itself, but to the institute in relation to moving government ministries to the city, something that's been talked about for years and years. How does the institute see that as perhaps assisting to the improvement of the city's economic status?
We have a research called gov.city that is analyzed the advantages that Jerusalem would have from concentrating all what we call the governmental ecosystem, meaning the government and all the different organs that are connected to the government here in Jerusalem. And clearly, when we talk about this ecosystem, the role of moving the government offices, those 149 governmental units that are not at present in Jerusalem, to Jerusalem, has a very big importance. I think that in evaluation that was done by one of our researchers, it showed that the contribution to the economy of Jerusalem will be almost 400 million shekel every year, just by moving those specific units from where they are today, mainly around Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem. So definitely we see a big importance to this, to the moving of these units to the city of Jerusalem, together with other organs that are not in Jerusalem at present, like some of the government companies, Mekorot, the electricity company, etc., etc. And there are other organizations that should be in Jerusalem and they're not in Jerusalem at present.
Understood. I'm going to ask two more questions just because we have a lot coming in right now, and reporters are interested in a big variety of topics in the city, so bear with me. Do your population figures for East Jerusalem include the areas outside of the wall, such as Kafar Aqab, Dahiyat, Al-Salam,
Dahiyat Al-Salam. Well, the official, what?
It was on two lines in the window that I was reading.
Oh, I'm sorry. The official data includes Kafar Aqab, Dahiyat Al-Salam, Shafat refugee camp, etc. But I can say that the official data for these neighborhoods, we look specifically at these neighborhoods for the official data, and it's not so accurate. We do have estimates of Palestinians living in Kafar Aqab and refugee and Shafat refugee camp. These estimates vary approximately from, Lior, please correct me if I'm mistaken, something like 80,000 in each one of these neighborhoods. This is approximately, and of course, not all of these residents carry Israeli residency. It's a diverse population. We have, of course, people living in the West Bank, which move for various reasons. One of them being, of course, marriage, families to these areas. So the official data includes them, but we're not sure about its accuracy.
Okay, one more statistical question, and then one more policy-related question, if you will. The first one, I'm not sure if the reporter meant leaving or living, in which case these are two very different questions, but it came in, how many Jews are leaving in the midst of an Arab neighborhood, and how many Jews are living in the midst of a purely Arab neighborhood? I'm assuming it's the second option, so you can go with that.
I also think so. I haven't augmented these data. I think we're talking about a few hundreds, but I'm sorry about. Well, I do not want to put any figure, because the data we have is very approximate. But we do have the data. We have it for larger. Yeah, of course. We have it for larger neighborhoods, And this is going to be published tomorrow in the statistical yearbook.
Okay, so we'll be very happy to share the copies with the reporters that were on the line. And the last very easy question.
If someone is interested in this specific data set, it needs a bit of calculation, but it could be achieved. Just to write to you, Talia, and then you'll copy us, and we'll be happy to provide it. It will take us, I don't know, half an hour in order to calculate this information.
Okay, good.
With a lot of reservations.
That's okay. Just put that in writing. And just a last question, very simple. Is dividing Jerusalem in the context of a future two-state solution still something that you see possible with all of the trends and figures that you've been gathering over the years?
Did you say this was a simple question?
I was just joking.
Well, I think that the possibility is not, it does not lie in the field of statistics. I think it's a very large question. I'm researching at the Institute for many years. I drew maps of possible solutions, possible divisions. I can say that we do not draw these maps anymore. I think that it's becoming less and less viable of an option. But as Yail said in the beginning, surprises are the only thing that we can be sure of in Jerusalem.
Lior, do you have anything to add to that answer?
You know, when I started working in the Institute 5 years ago, I said that Jerusalem can trust only two things, which are Nashim v'Nisim, women and miracles. And to summarize what Yair said, basically, if there will be a political will, of course, Jerusalem can be divided. Every city can be divided. The harm to the way of life of people, the damage that will be caused to the way people interact, the way people live, the way people spend their time, the place of work, the legal aspect will be extremely problematic, but it does not say that this is impossible. Just say that there will be a lot of pain for people on both sides of a line if there will be a decision to divide the city.
All right, you've given us a lot of food for thought. Yair and Lior, thank you so much both for your time, and thank you to the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research for your continued partnership.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.